Welcome, everyone. This is Balkans Debrief. I'm Ilva Tare, resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. In this podcast, we discuss the most pressing issues in the Western Balkans. And as we mark the 10th anniversary of the Berlin process, it's important to recognize the crucial role civil society plays in driving progress, especially in a region where political leaders often remain stuck in outdated narrative. As one speaker put it last week in the forum perfectly, civil society can change history, cannot change history, but it can shape the future if there is political and public will. Over 115 organizations gathered to voice concerns about the rule of law and democracy, the shrinking civic space, and rising intimidation. To discuss all this, I'm delighted to be joined today by Simonida Kacarska, Director of the European Policy Institute from Skopje. Simonida, welcome.
Hi.
And Klodjan Seferaj, Program Manager at the Open Society Foundation's Western Balkans from Tirana. Welcome, Klodjan.
Hi, Ilva. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And I hope we will use this opportunity to explore the key recommendations from the forum and discuss the future of the Berlin process. I found it very interesting, the call for stronger rule of law and protection of democratic value that was a central theme of the forum. How can, in your view, governments in the Western Balkans demonstrate a genuine commitment to these principles, especially in the context of the EU accession reforms? And what can civil society do to hold these governments more accountable? Simonida.
Thanks. The stronger call for rule of law and protection of democratic values is not surprising to many of us that actually live in the region. Unfortunately, the trends over the last, we can even say 20 years, have not been as positive as we had hoped for. Many of the countries face democratic backsliding, have questionable policies of inclusion of various stakeholders, including civil society, in policy and decision-making processes. And therefore, this call for a stronger rule of law is actually very welcome. Going back to what you mentioned, having celebrated, quote unquote, the 10th anniversary of the Berlin process this year, probably this process has remained to be the one venue where there is some organized format of civil society involvement. We can talk later about the extent of this and the impact of such involvement, which is a different story. But this rather informal process itself has always had an organized component of civil society engagement, which is probably one of the strong suits of it. So in this sense, I would argue that it was probably a demonstration effect or an example on the side of those member states involved to showcase to the governments of the region of how civil society should or could be engaged in decision-making, given that in the region, this is one of the plagues, one of the problems of the overall democratic development of most, if not all, of these countries. So now going back to your question, how can the governments actually showcase this? I would argue that we don't need to focus specifically on the EU accession reforms. Actually, the governments can show very clearly through involvement and through feedback to not only civil society organizations, but broader stakeholders, businesses, academia, through their active engagement in policy and decision-making overall. Now, in some of the countries where there is an more active EU accession or EU negotiations process, this can be done through the accession negotiations, but whereas in others, this needs to be a regular practice. So that's why I would not really single out the EU accession process as the one driver, because we need to look at civil society engagement and civil society involvement horizontally in the overall public policy making. This can be done through creating an enabling environment for civil society, through easing the formats through which civil society organizations can be established, can be supported. We know that in the region, the state funding for any kind of civil society organizations is limited, but also through the active engagement at the decision and policy-making level of government.
Thank you, Simonida. Claudia, what's your take on the role that civil society can have in pushing the governments for a stronger rule of law and democratic values? Will they listen? Do the governments are responsive towards the civil society approach?
Thank you, Ilva. From my point of view, I think that this year the novelty of the Berlin process was the inclusion of and the focus on the rule of law. As you highly mentioned, and also from Simonida, this time it was one of the priorities of the civil society that was prepared and submitted and taken on board from the chair's leader declaration. So we see in two of the recommendations that the rule of law should be a priority. It's not only related to the chair's conclusion, but also is one of the preconditions for implementation of the new common action plan for the common regional market. And this is also emphasized for the third time in the declaration that they adopted. I see this as complementary to the process. We already know that this process is a political process created in 2014 as an instrument for supporting regional and regional projects and regional initiatives. So in this aspect, we have the opportunity to combine a political process with transforming and linking it with regional projects and political implementation of the rule of law. One example that I would like to illustrate to provide an answer to you is that during 2023, Open Society Foundation for Western Balkans, we had the opportunity to implement the Berlin process in Albania. Together with a partner of different civil society, academia, experts, representative of the governments, we conducted a very exhaustive report of the consultation. And one of the priorities that was also related to the rule of law. We managed after one of the key recommendations was how the Western Balkans can be included in the rule of law reports. As you may know, European Commissions as an instrument that every year monitor the implementation of rule of law reports at EU level. From 2024, we have very good news that now 4 out of 6 of the countries are part of this mechanism where the European Commission can monitor the performance of the rule of law, and also the civil society can contribute and can provide recommendation how this can be transformed in practical terms. This is also related to one of the good examples that we have from Albania. As you may know, we just had the European accession opening the chapters for the first cluster that are related to the fundamentals, including the democracy and the rule of law in Albania. Now the civil society has the opportunity, as in the other countries, to contribute by providing a technical expertise in monitoring the process and also working not only with the governments, but working mainly with EU institutions, with their partners from EU, how reforms that are at national level can be also implemented that have the same common results at regional level.
One of the key concerns also mentioned, apart from the democratic issues and the rule of law, was the rising intimidation, the shrinking civic space, the lack of funding for the civil society to enable itself to be this actor, to push for progress. I want to ask you, in which I saw some of the events and the panels, and Serbia was mentioned as one of the countries. Is this more just a one country issue, or is spread around across the region when it comes to intimidation and basically not letting the civil society be able to do its work? Simonida.
Shall I start? Yeah. The issue of the shrinking civil space is probably an issue that is shared in the region, but also in the European Union. We have to keep in mind that it's a concern throughout Europe. In the region, you mentioned, rightly singled out the case of intimidation of activists in Serbia. We have had instances of civil society colleagues being held at borders, which are for sure not the examples that we would like to follow to create an enabling environment. But this is not the only case. The broader discussion that we have faced, as there were some also discussions in some of the countries in the region on the legislation for registration of CSOs as foreign agents, is not unfortunately it's not distant to this region. Such discussions have been held in Republika Srpska. Such proposals were made just last week by parties in Montenegro. So this is a very worrying trend throughout the region. And that's why in my first answer, I mentioned the issue of the enabling environment. The European Union does have instruments to actually monitor the enabling environment for civil society, which will be enforced in the fundamentals cluster as part of the roadmaps for the functioning of democratic institutions, which currently Albania will be discussing and will be implementing as part of their accession negotiations. So in this sense, these elements, although not directly, let's say, included as part of the informal process, such as the Berlin process they are being pushed on the agenda. And in that sense, the Berlin process did provide the civil society forum did provide a venue to actually raise these concerns among a broader set of European stakeholders.
Klodi?
Yes, to add on what was presented by Simonida, is how we can work towards improvement of this status in the region. So one opportunity that EU can bring to us, and what we did starting from 2023, is to have a regional approach in working with civil society. So together with Simonida, with European Policy Center, and a group of important organizations and civil society actors from the region, we are working now for creation of a regional agenda. So now civil society can go behind national agendas or their main concerns and create a set of priorities that the countries can advance. Now, the challenges that you are mentioning are going to be continue if we are not working in the direction of contributing to the process. And the process can be improved only if we are a set of actors that are working together. Together, I mean, not only the Western Balkans, but also working with partners that have similar issues at the EU level, and using in good terms the opportunity that European accession can bring in cooperating with the European Commission, cooperating with different EU institutions, how we can improve this situation. And the mechanisms that were presented by Simonida are in place, but this pressure on ourselves as a civil society actor is going to increase because the roles needs to be improved, but especially I think, and we should emphasize is we need to increase our technical capacities, and we are working in this direction in order to really contribute in the improvement of the process.
Klodi, this regional agenda that the civil society is preparing, to whom will be directed? Who will be responsible to follow this agenda?
From our point of view, is also related to the Berlin process. So what we did in 2023, I'm referring to it because we had a close inclusion in the process and also working directly with a set of different actors, is that we work in defining baseline status from 2022. We organized a set of large consultation. We defined a set of priorities together with different actors from the region and also from partners from EU that can improve the situation in the Balkans by pressuring the governments, but also asking the EU institution to focus on these issues. And there are small interventions that can be adopted, but also there is an agenda that you should work in a long term. So what can be improved also in terms of the Berlin process, that the set of recommendation and this regional agenda can have a continuity. So we can discuss in more details, but this is one of the aspects that we are seeing that should be a priority, that the region should continue investing in a set of recommendations that are to be implemented by the governments, of course, with the support of EU.
Simonida, what do you think? What's your evaluation of the responsiveness of governments towards this agenda, towards these concerns and priorities that civil society puts forward?
I would not say that their responsiveness is high, if I had to be very honest. We see that even at political level, sometimes the responsiveness to the joint agendas already agreed is even low. because if we're in all fairness, many of the agreements that were also politically, they were signed by the governments 2 years ago in Berlin were very difficult to implement. And in that sense, the responsiveness is not where we would want it to be. But the such processes is the one that we are discussing here provide a very much needed top-down and bottom-up pressure for the implementation. So we, in some way, we expect that the responsiveness of the governments will increase if there is joint pressure, both from some of the EU member states which are involved in the Berlin process, and from bottom up, from civil society and broader citizenry. And in all fairness, for after these 10 years, with with the adoption of the bigger agendas at the EU level, such as the growth plan for the Western Balkans, some of the key achievements of the Berlin process, as informal as it is, such as, for example, the common regional market, have become very much ingrained with the European integration. So we can't see any of these processes anymore separately one from the other, which means that also the pressure of the civil society and their role is amplified in many ways.
As Klodjan mentioned, a regional agenda of the civil society for the Western Balkans. But my question is Berlin process still relevant at this point after 10 years? What adjustments should be made? What's the vision of the civil society? How will Berlin process look in the next 10 years? Will it still be there?
Yeah, it's a very good question. The informality, which I mentioned a lot of times during these 10 minutes, has led to the questioning of what will happen next year or what will happen oftentimes, although mostly in the early years, in all fairness. I think that some of the achievements that also Klodjan mentioned, such as the inclusion in the rule of law reports and some of these topics that were very much pushed by civil society, have showcased the effect of the top-down and bottom-up approach, which was enabled through this process. I was looking at a stock-taking study, which was prepared now for the Berlin process for its 10-year anniversary. And I was looking at the chair's conclusions in general. There is a sense also among the civil society and among the governments that the process should continue as such, because it gave a support in many of the important policies such as, for example, the common regional market and so on. It gave results in terms of some of the suggestions from civil society. Now, in which format should this continue has been on the agenda, in all fairness, for a very long time. I have participated in most, if not all of the events. The question has always been the leadership of Germany and sometimes the balancing of the role of the other member states. Where do they come in the process? After every summit, there has been the question mark, or where will it go next? So, which creates a certain sense of probably unease at a certain point. But I don't see many people actually. We don't hear this year so much contestation of its future. The stock-taking study does suggest a small secretariat for monitoring of the achievements of the Berlin process. But I think there's still debate on the policy level whether this is the direction that should be taken. Civil society has proposed oftentimes, but I think it's more working on the spin-off initiatives which have come out of it. We should not forget that one of the biggest achievements, such as the Regional Youth Cooperation Office, is an achievement of the Berlin process itself. I mean, there's many other elements which will continue and provide sustainability in addition to the formal summit itself, because we are often focused on the summit, not focusing on the other elements of it. But the debates are probably here. I mean, there's support broadly for it, the discussion of whether and how it should be actually institutionalized. But we would be amiss also not to mention that the common regional market will actually become part of the reform agendas in all 6 countries of the region, and as a condition for EU assistance, which means that it will be monitored directly from the European Commission and it will be taken on board by the governments.
So, Klodjan, is the Berlin process needed still?
This is a very good question. And from my point of view, we should emphasize the importance of the Berlin process. And as I mentioning at the beginning of the novelty of this year. So for the first time, we see that there is a transformation of the process, as we mentioned, from the political process. It has been transformed into having more support into the region, creating a regional economic area, like Simonida was mentioning, and the role of regional cooperation office in preparing the action plan for the common regional market. Now this year we have a new plan that was adopted that is more human-centered. So now we see that they are aiming to come as close as possible to the needs of the citizens from the European Western Balkans. But this is also related to few novelties that were for this year. We do see some inclusion of gender. For example, we have seen a green agenda ministerial, which was for the first time. But what we missed, that Simonida has emphasized, is that we didn't hear who is going to be the host of the next year, and we were very anxious to see that how this process will continue, and this answer we didn't receive. We have provided even in 2023 and this year our recommendation how this process can be improved, or this instrument. We want to see more institutionalized inclusion of the civil society. We have seen from the past that this should not be as a process that dedicated to the summit, but this the organization, the capacities of the different actors that are involved can contribute only if it is a regional agenda of priorities that we are going to work toward all the year. So we have seen what have been the most successful sectors is where the civil society has been engaged from the beginning. They have contributed in the ministerial meetings, and it has culminated with the inclusion of their recommendation in the chair's declaration. But this chair declaration should be monitored, how they are going to implement.
So there is a question mark where next year Berlin process will be, or if there will be a Berlin summit at all. Maybe Brussels, now that Simonida said we have common regional market, just giving ideas here, but I'm sure you have discussed this among you. Thank you very much for sharing your view on what happened in the Berlin process, civil society and think tank forum, Simonida and Claudia.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Very important insights. Thank you for watching us.